Hi, thanks for joining me and welcome back if you've been here before. So today I'm going to be talking about something a little bit different from my norm. Vinyl LP, new release or new reissue. The Thievery Corporation, Richest Man in Babylon. I'd sort of call it down-tempo, trip-hop. It's very chilled out, it's very beautiful. I really like it. This is probably my favourite Thievery Corporation LP. And one of my favourites of the genre. But having loved this LP for quite a long time, well, since it came out, frankly, and when it came out first time I heard it was on CD. This isn't actually the original CD. I'll get to this in a minute. I listened to it on CD for a couple of decades, and I thought, well, it would be really nice to get it on vinyl. I've got a much more high-end vinyl playing front end than I have digital playing front end, although my digital front end is pretty damn good. I'd sort of fancied a copy of this, but when it was first released, it actually came out as a 4 LP set, so over 8 sides, which really was sort of a step too far for me, I think, versus putting on a CD and listening to the whole album in one go, especially bearing in mind it's sort of chill out music. And then I think a few years ago it was released as a double album, a 2 LP set, which is more manageable, and then that was reissued again for Record Store Day last year, and that's where it really sort of came back into my onto my radar, if you like. And the Record Store Day release was only in America. It wasn't on the UK Record Store Day list, which was a real pain. And but I still I would have undoubtedly got this last year if I'd been living in the States. So I was quite surprised a couple of weeks ago to see it in the new releases bin in my local record shop. So frankly, I couldn't say no. I just bought it on the spur of the moment. I really did, and it's a beautiful thing. Here's the cover. You can see it's all very nice. There we are. It cost me $29.99. Not too bad for a double album, I think. It's beautifully packaged, and I will show you the inner sleeves here. Really lovely. I won't get the other one out, I won't bother. I will mention I've put these anti-static inners in, which I use for pretty much everything. But when it arrived, it was just the printed inner with the LP in there. Now, I don't know if you've ever had this, but I literally had to wrestle the LP out of the sleeve. It was just down to static. It was so stuck in the sleeve. It was a real tough job to actually sort of peel the cover off and then pull it out. And there's finest sort of micro surface scratches all over it because of that. They don't sound, of course, because you're not playing the surface of the record, and they are the finest little marks on the surface, but it's annoying and just an indication of records should be in anti-static inners no matter what. So I really did struggle to actually get the record out of the cover, which is quite ridiculous. But anyway, a very beautiful thing. Undoubtedly, I think. It's a lovely cover. It's really well produced. I think this is pressed by GZ Media. I'm not 100% certain, but I'm pretty sure that's the case. Okay. And I couldn't, £30, double LP, beautiful cover. Had to have it. Bought it home. After getting it out of the cover, put it on the turntable and gave it a spin. And I'll be honest with you, I was disappointed. I really was. It sounded sort of smooth and sweet and layered, but the whole thing just seemed flat. The soundstage was as deep as the soundstage on this album ever is, which is quite deep front to back. But in terms of width, it was very narrow between the speakers. It just dynamically seemed a bit flat. So my first impressions were really quite sort of let down, and I've gone back and I've listened to it more and more and compared it to the CD, and I'll get onto this in a minute, and also to streaming on Qobuz. Now, first of all, I'll just to give you a little bit of info on this album. It was released in 2002, and the Thievery Corporation are basically Eric Hilton and Rob Garza, who are a couple of sort of multi-instrumentalist producers, and they work with a host of sort of session artists, freelance artists, and they make this sort of, you know, trip hop, down tempo, very, very, very chilled. I would say it's electronic, but it isn't really. There's an awful lot of acoustic instruments in there, from sitars, guitars, congas, bongos, drums, all manner of shakers. There are sort of Latin influences, I think you could say, throughout. I just think it's very beautiful music. But let's get on to the sound quality of the three different versions. Now, obviously, the version that I think most people will be listening to is the streamed version, because that just is the music format of the masses these days. Now, when I play it on Qobuz, there are pros and there are cons. And first of all, I'm going to talk about the CD versus the Qobuz stream, okay? So, if we take the first track on the album, Heaven's Gonna Burn Your Eyes, it's a very, very, very beautiful song. There's a female vocalist on this track called Emiliana Torrini, who's Icelandic, and I think there's a quality to her voice that's kind of quite childlike and playful and naive, in a childlike, naive, playful quality. When I say that, a sort of a girlishness that I think you can sort of hear in Bjork's voice. So, you know, there's a definite sort of familiarity there, but it's very, very beautiful. There's quite a lot of layering of her vocal, and the rest of the song is really, you've got a bass and a piano, or an electric piano, and the electric piano is sort of banging out a kind of a rhythm. Obviously the bass is playing a groove, and then there's sort of shakers going on in the sort of the back of the soundstage, and then halfway through the song the drums kick in, okay? But if we start off and talk about the CD, so when it starts, you've got these synths and this shaker at the back, which is sort of like a, you know, percussive sort of shaker, but it's also being echoed, sort of thing, right at the back of the soundstage, just slightly to the right of centre. And then you've got the sort of the keyboard sort of fill up, sort of a wash, if you like. And then the piano really sort of is quite percussive. It's an electric piano, clearly, but it sounds good, and it kind of provides, along with the bass, the percussive drive and groove and swing of the song, okay? And now that's how it sounds on the CD. When the vocal comes in, it's quite solid, it's quite etched, you can hear the layering, you can hear the expression, and there's a little sort of giggly laughter in the, you know, like I say, it's quite a girlish, sort of naive, in the nicest possible way, voice, playful, sort of childlike quality to it. Very beautiful. The whole thing, you know, it sounds great, and then when the drums kick in, there's a sort of a, you know, a good groove to the drums, and they sort of take over as the main sort of driving force of the groove. All well and good. Now, if you go to the stream, I want to be specific here. When I talk about playing the CD, what I've done is I have ripped the CD to a computer, to a hard drive, NAS drive in fact, using XLD, which gets a bit perfect rip of the CD, and I'm playing that rip as a WAV file, okay? It's not compressed in any way, losslessly or other, and I'm playing that on a Mac Mini, which is fitted with CAD ground controls and USB controls. The network is using a CAD Ethernet controls, so there's an awful lot of attention to detail to sort of minimize digital computer noise from the playback system, far more so than would be done in your average CD player. And that's playing through a CAD DAC. And There's no digital filtering, there's no upsampling, there's no oversampling. It's a very, very, very purist way of playing CDs. Okay? Now I'm playing the Qobuz stream through exactly the same system, right? So the Qobuz stream, everything that is on the CD is there, but everything is very slightly sort of cupped, a bit like this, sort of a bit more like, a bit like that. Maybe I should do this, a bit like this. And a little bit sort of fuzzy around the edges. There isn't the sort of the layering of the keyboards. There isn't the layering of the voice. It all gets a little bit edgy and confused. And you lose that expression. You lose that playful, joyful quirkiness and the, the beautiful fun in the voice. You lose the sort of the timbre of the shaker. And you lose the tunefulness of the bass. So it all actually, it really goes to pot, to be honest. And streamed, it doesn't really sound that good. But what you do maintain from the CD is the sort of the dynamic start and stoppiness, if you like. Okay, now I think it's time to go to the vinyl. When you put this vinyl LP on, what you have is you have that depth front to back of the CD, more so than the stream. You have the timbre of the shakers, and you've kind of got a more natural timbre of all of the instruments, but there is a caveat on that I want to bring up in a minute. So in terms of everything sounding sweet and everything sounding kind of in an organic, natural sort of way, it really works well. But there is a really, really big but with the vinyl, okay? Whilst everything sounds sweet, everything also sounds a bit flat. And it's a little bit sort of, the sound stages are just a little bit sort of held in left to right. It doesn't sort of leap out at you. When we get to sort of halfway through the track and the drums come in, you can kind of hear that there's a good sort of degree of snap and sort of punch to the sort of the toms and the cymbals and everything. It all works quite well, but there is a distinct lack of deep bass. And I think what they've done is they very, very slightly eked back on the compression for the vinyl LP. But what they haven't done is sort of opened up the lower registers of the bandwidth. And so by sort of just compressing everything just that little bit more for the CD and the Qobuz stream, they're actually just giving a little bit more intensity and a little bit more drive to the music. So whilst this sounds all very, very layered, very, very smooth, lovely depth, it lacks drive. And it doesn't slightly lack drive, it really lacks drive. So in terms of sort of listening enjoyment, I think I've got to put the LP last. Because even though the stream sounds sort of coloured and cupped and fuzzy compared with both the vinyl and the LP, it has its dynamic kind of rhythm to it. It has its dynamic groove and swing. The LP just doesn't have that. It's all a bit limp and just sounds like a dirge. And when I say you've got that at the start of the song, really, you've got the bass, boom, 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 kind of thing, and this piano sort of chunk, chunk, chunk. Kind of note, and those two really create the rhythm. And then when the drums come in later on, there's a lovely shuffling kind of drum boogie to it. Because the piano, it sounds piano-y, well, electric piano-y as it should, of course, but it just doesn't have the dynamic kind of attack of the piano. Just all a bit smooth and soft, and the bass just sounds a bit syrupy, and that combined, you kind of lose, you lose the whole grip, you lose the whole drive and the whole rhythm. And if I'm going to grade the three of them, because I think this is quite an interesting thing to do, so let's grade the three of them on sweetness, okay? So in third place is the stream. It's really not very sweet at all. It's a bit harsh and it's a bit gritty and a bit coarse. So in sweetness, I'm going to give the stream 5 out of 10. I'll give the CD 8.5 out of 10, and I'll give the LP 9 out of 10 on sweetness. Okay, but you know, something can be sugary sweet, like a cup of tea with condensed milk and 3 sugars. It might be super sugary sweet, but you know, if I tried to drink that, I'd throw up. So sweetness is not what it is all about for me. It's a very nice trait to have in your music, but it's not the be all and end all of it. Now, if you talk about layering and texture and sort of seeing into the recording, again, I think the stream has probably got 6 out of 10. I'd say the LP and the CD are probably about equal on about 8.5 out of 10, something like that. This is sort of layering texture and seeing in, okay? And then you've got that sort of solidity and the dynamic kind of, well, the dynamic solidity of it, if you like. And on that, I'm going to have to give the LP 6. I'll give the stream 8, and I'll give the CD 9.5. Okay, so the CD, of the 3, if you want to listen to this music and enjoy it, you know, for a groove involving captivating something you can sort of nod your head along to, tap your foot and just chill out and groove into, the CD wins absolutely hands down. If you want to sort of listen to it in the background and just, you know, the same, get into, tap your foot, nod your head, just, you're not really kind of sat there listening too hard. So, you know, a little bit of grain, a little bit of grit, a little bit of sort of muffling won't really upset you too much. Then I think you're okay with the stream. If you want to sit there between the speakers and just listen through for the depth and the sort of the layering, but really divorce yourself entirely from a musical experience, and frankly, God knows why you'd want to do that. That isn't music for me. I know I talk a lot about sort of pulling music apart and listening to its the threads and you know, how things are put together and all the layers and the textures and this, that and the other, but you know, that is interesting. It is about how music is put together and everything else, but at the end of the day, the whole has got to be musically entertaining. And this is just, you know, if you're going to rate them as a dirge, this is the biggest dirge of the lot. You know, it's sweet, it's layered, it's smooth, it's detailed and it's textured, but it's boring. Okay, it's flat and it's boring. And so I have to say, in this instance, this is a case of, you know, a modern reissue is really, really, really missing the target, which is quite an ironic thing, I think, because that's a much bigger target than that one is. Okay, on that note, I'll say thank you very, very much for watching, and I'll see you all again soon. Bye now. Bye.